Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I guess that was reversed. Did we have the microphone on during the intro and off afterwards? I don't know. If so, then you heard me getting ready for today's show by saying, oh, I can't believe it's time for another show. And it is. Much to catch up on, of course, today. And as I said in the morning post today, it's probably useless to try and avoid the fact that the whole day today, I'm sure, as the whole week has been, the whole latter half of the week, and probably the weekend will be spent on reading through the various excerpts from the, is it post hoc, I suppose, books written by all of the reporters who were supposedly covering, and I guess they were, covering the Trump administration during, the years that he was in office. And now they're letting us know just how bad he really was, with special focus on January 6th, which, maybe we should investigate or something like that. But meanwhile, time marches on elsewhere in the world as well. We still are puzzled, I guess, about what's going on in Haiti and how we got there. And now we can add to the list Cuba, although I suppose that's a little less puzzling in the sense that, I guess we probably felt this was long overdue in Cuba. The United States not being a tremendous help, as usual, in the area, but people rising up in protest against, a mixed bag of things. I don't think you can simply say that they are anti-government protests and leave it at that. Probably too simplistic a thing to say, but they certainly include an anti-government element. But they're probably anti a lot of things going on in Cuba, and as usual, a concerted effort probably here in the United States by Cuban Americans, some of whom haven't actually had that much to do with Cuba except for longing to, I guess, run it again since they last had the chance in the 1950s. But some Cuban Americans throwing out their own opinions about what's going on and what ought to come next. And when confused Americans are running around asking for what's going on in Cuba, well, it's natural to then turn to the Cuban American community and ask what's going on, just as we had with the Haitian American community. But they've been practicing this drill for a long time. So I'm not 100% sure how well we do by throwing everything over to Cuban American community. It depends largely on who you talk to. So I don't know if we're going to be able to unravel that one. Also, at the same time, happening and not getting much notice on the show anyway, apparently tremendous flood damage in Europe. Also not usually a focus of our attention. Like, what's the weather in Europe? But, I mean, it's a little bit extreme here. So maybe we could dive into a little bit of that too. But for now, we can occupy ourselves almost entirely with the minutia of A, what's already gone on here in the United States, B, who's working on retelling the story in different ways from what had happened so it comes out to their advantage, and what are we going to do about the fact that they're doing this? So there's plenty to check in on here. Let's see, what's up with Bill this morning? He says the Kagro in the morning radio show is live now. This part is true. Kagro X doesn't do coups. That's true. If he did do coups, why, it'd be a mad zoo coup. Probably. Led by Count Dooku. Okay. Excellent. Seems like as informative a direction to go as any. Yeah, I think that was Donald Trump's crazy communique from yesterday. Mixed feelings about people actually taking screenshots of those things and sharing them on Twitter. I do see people complaining. You shouldn't be sharing the comments of the guy who was banned from Twitter on Twitter. But on the other hand, it actually pays to figure out and keep some tabs, I guess, on what stupid thing he's saying so that you can, I guess, keep reminding yourself how stupid and crazy he really is. One thing that came out of the reading of the excerpts, and I don't know that I have the excerpt itself handy, but I did grab this report written up over at Crooks and Liars by Susie Madrick, who says that one of the latest nuggets mined from the excerpts, I mean, there's really no other way to describe these things, was what Mike Pence was himself up to on January 6th. Of course, you'll recall that the crowd showed up and at some point was chanting, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence," and did erect a scaffold and a gallows. So, they may or may not have had anything to do with one another. Personally, like the people who put up the gallows, I'm sure obviously whoever put up the gallows planned it. It was actually, for an impromptu style gallows, it was actually pretty sturdy looking. I don't know if it's really, I wouldn't say it was the sturdiest construction in the world. And the noose was a little hinky too. I'll say that. But it probably would have worked. It could have functioned, and that's the dangerous part. And also, there was a tremendous amount of lumber involved. And I don't know whether lumber prices had shot up at that point or not. So it could have been an expensive undertaking, but it was clearly something that you can't carry in your pocket. That is to say, somebody made plans, even if it was just for show. Somebody made plans to construct that thing, and it was also their idea of a good idea to construct a gallows outside of the congressional HQ, if you will, outside of the Capitol. And that probably shows pretty poor judgment all by itself. Anyway, so like I said, I don't know whether they had any contact with the people who were actually chanting "Hang Mike Pence," or whether the people who got in there and decided that the best that they could do at the moment was to chant had seen the gallows and thought, "Hey, that's a good idea. Who should we hang?" But anyway, that's what I had taken away from the initial accounts. But this one, I guess, interviewing various sources, they've come up with this. How did we get to this nugget? It says, Susie writes it up here. Here's a little tidbit that flew past yesterday on Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace. That's where this was spotted. "I want to read more about Mike Pence's experience on January 6th, Wallace said, reading from the Leonid Rucker book, I Alone Can Fix It. That's the one by the Washington Post reporters. And so I opened up the Washington Post front page to see what was new. I didn't see people chattering about it on Twitter this morning. Not just this thing, but anything new, any new discoveries from the latest excerpts. And I don't know whether there's no excerpt today or people are still reading it, or I don't know, I'm following the wrong people, or you all got bored and fell asleep. Not a bad idea. But here's what she, I guess, had to say last night, and Susie relates to us. They go on record at 2:26 p.m. after a team of agents scouted a safe path to ensure the Pences would not encounter trouble. You'll recall that Pence had his family with him. At least his wife was with him. It's possible that their daughter, do they have more children than that, were there because, it was a big day and everything. But, okay. So at 2:26 p.m., a team of Secret Service agents scouts out a safe path to get them out of the Capitol. We already know that he was escorted out under guard. We've seen the video. We've seen aides of his carrying the nuclear football. I mean, it was a fairly serious thing that, I guess, in theory, though they couldn't have done anything with it. We did read a little bit about that, the logistics of using the nuclear football. But, I mean, that would have been a bit of a prize, right? Didn't somebody seize a laptop from Nancy Pelosi's office and allegedly offer it for sale, perhaps to the Russians or a person who claims Russian nationality or something? I don't know whether they cleared that whole thing up. But getting a hold of a nuclear football, maybe not such a great thing to have happen. Anyway, they scouted out a safe path, and then I don't know how he pronounces his name, but their top secret service agent, his last name is Goebbels, I don't know, Giebels. And I would ask him, but it's a secret service, you see. They can't tell me. But anyway, their top secret service agent helps them get out of the building. And this is interesting. So the rest of Pence's detail guides the family down the stairs to a secure subterranean area that rioters couldn't reach, where his armored limousine awaited. Now, I don't know, by what logic they determined that the rioters can't reach it. I mean, they're supposed to not be able to reach the Capitol, but they did reach that. So at any rate, somehow I guess they figured that it was secured, and his armored limousine is there, and they basically say, get in the car, right? So his head Secret Service agent asks Pence to get into one of the vehicles, and he says, I guess Pence responds to him, "We can hold here," he said. "I'm not getting in the car," Pence replied. And I guess Bill was speculating this morning, maybe was this supposed to be, I guess he was responding to what I was saying last night about Mike Pence and his actions there. But if you just stop there, it sounds like Pence might be hinting at no, I'm not going to abandon the Capitol. I'll stay here. It'll be my Alamo. I'll go back in and fight for America. And I'm sure that's what he's hoping you'll think about him. But I don't know if this quote actually does it, because there's more to it. "We can hold here. I'm not getting in the car, Tim," he tells Tim, I guess, Goebbels. But then Pence says, "I trust you, Tim." This is where it turns. You're right. "I trust you, Tim, but you're not driving the car. If I get in that vehicle," or maybe he's like a cop speak, "if I get in that vehicle, you guys are taking off. I'm not getting in that car." What's he talking about here? Apparently, the take here, according to Susie's recounting of what Nicole Wallace says, is that Pence is saying, "I trust nobody beyond my top Secret Service guy." What if the rest of the Secret Service detail that's here today is on Trump's side in this coup attempt, and I'm just climbing into a car only to be kidnapped and taken elsewhere, and either who knows what, do I fall into the hands of the Hang Mike Pence crowd? Do they lock me in the basement, hold me incommunicado until I agree to throw out the electoral votes? What? That's interesting. Fascinating. And the stuff of, political thriller movies or something, but this apparently actually happened this way. And yet, here's Mike Pence now out there saying, pending what? Donald Trump. He's deferring to Donald Trump in making his own plans to run for president, but in any case has no plans to criticize Trump or any of his supporters, though we already knew they were out there chanting to hang him and erecting a gallows to do it. That's going to look very bad in court, too, by the way, when they bring some of those insurgents to trial and say, "When you were chanting, 'Hang Mike Pence,' what was that all about?" "Oh, we didn't really mean it. It was just political anger. We were just venting." All right. Here's some pictures of some gallows that were constructed outside. Well, we didn't know that, Sure. Okay. Maybe you didn't, but it doesn't look good in front of the jury. Anyway, speaking of not looking good in front of the jury, so here's Pence saying, "I'm so, I don't know what, frightened and unnerved by what's happening here. It's clear that I faced the serious prospect maybe of death at the hands of this mob directed by this president, but I survived, so now I'm going to run for president by kissing his ass and licking his boots." I can't believe that would be the case. But that's what it takes to get to power, so I'm going to do it. And, all right, so last night I was saying a Steve Scalise medal for this guy, for the politician who threatened with actual possibility of violent death, does the least with his second chance in life that could possibly be imagined. Scalise, we often say, imagine doing what he's doing with your second chance at life, having been shot by a rifle-wielding maniac at some point. Changes nothing about his approach to life. And here, Mike Pence almost hanged, and he feared possibly being kidnapped and murdered by Trump-backed insurgent forces, and then finding out, well, no, I guess I wasn't going to be killed by the Secret Service at their behest. But I did think that was a possibility because of what was going on elsewhere in the Capitol. But let's put all that aside and talk about how much I support Donald Trump and how much he supports me. I can't imagine voting for such a character, but Unfortunately, there are about 70 million people who could, provided the other one decides he's not running or, I don't know, let's say drops dead at some point today, like William Regnery did apparently earlier, either today or earlier this week. I saw briefly in the news this morning. No mourning for that, but it did come to my attention in the morning, if you insist on my using the word, even if it's the wrong spelling, in connection with his death. All right, so here we are with this situation where he won't get in the car because he's afraid of what's going on and what might happen to him in the car. Nicole Wallace, I guess, continues on reading. The Pences made their way to a secure underground area to wait out the riot. Pence feared a conspiracy, feared that the Secret Service would aid Trump and his ultimate aims that day. This is the most harrowing version of Mike Pence's day I've seen reported, she said. Nicole, this is typical of a dictatorship of an authoritarian anti-democratic regime, Jeremy Bash said in response. This is not typical of the greatest democracy ever on the face of the planet. And, well, that calls that whole construct into question a little bit, but there you have it. And I think what you're seeing here is a dynamic that the former president advanced and wished for, which is to somehow enlist the security services, to include law enforcement, to include maybe the Secret Service, the United States military, and maybe the intelligence community, which are and must remain apolitical organizations. So another one of those stories about how close to the edge we may be. I think it was his ambition to somehow insert them into his political gamesmanship to retain power. Thankfully, those organizations are full of women and men who have sworn an oath to the Constitution up and down the chain of command, who I think have been classically trained in the democratic ideals that underpinned our security, intelligence, and military organizations, and they were having nothing of it. The reason we got to this point, where essentially Trump was trying to set up a situation where might would make right, meaning my security services would help achieve a political outcome, is because Donald Trump took us there. And I want to tip my hat to those people inside our professional government organizations who continue to be under attack today in some parts of our body politic, because our organizations should never be brought into an election controversy for any political gain. And then I'll just add here, it says, is this Susie adding in here? I'll just add here that I think Pence was more than entitled to worry, as we've written here before, so it is Susie's voice here. Trump did deeply politicize the Secret Service, and a lot of the Secret Service agents went full MAGA. That's true. I don't know what they're linking to here, but I guess we'll take a look. But I know that they were all in on not masking and were by the dozens picking up COVID in traveling along with him to rallies at during the peak of the pandemic. So there's that. Susie's referring to one of her older articles here from just a few months ago, from May, saying, quoting Carol Leonig, I guess, who was getting ready to release this book. Anyway, some Secret Service agents went full MAGA under Trump. Let's just read this one. I don't think I recall seeing this. Rachel Maddow had Washington Post journalist Carol Leonig on as her guest that previous night to talk about her new book. Oh, a different book. Wow, she's busy with books. This was a May, I guess, interview. So at that point, the new book was Zero Fail, The Rise and Fall of the Secret Service. So she's saving all the nuggets for multiple books. This is getting to be a habit, unfortunately. It turned out to be one horror story after another, leaving viewers afraid for the protection of President Biden. And that did raise some issues. Leonig talked about, and I don't know if I'm saying her name right or not, but I should be able to figure it out, because apparently, rather than reporting in the newspaper, she's all over television selling the books. Someone's pronouncing the name right. I'm just not watching. Anyway, she talked about how under Trump, many of the Secret Service went full MAGA and believed the conspiracy theories that the election was stolen. That is dangerous. I always wondered what would happen if he finally came down to it and he came to remove him from the White House. It never occurred to me that the Secret Service would actually, that the agents would believe the conspiracy theories so much as they would believe, well, I don't know, I have a duty to protect this guy, and there's a political dispute of some kind over whether or not he's entitled to remain here, and I can't get involved with that, so I'll just sort of protect this guy until, otherwise notified, I guess. But, I mean, that's a political decision in itself. Obviously, they're not going to get out of the paradox. But I thought, it's possible they might justify it to themselves on the protective mission and not on belief in the conspiracy theories. That didn't occur to me. I mean, I guess if we really had gamed it out, it wasn't worth spending that much time on what they thought in their, what was going on in the heads of the Secret Service agents. Once you conclude that they might continue to provide protection just because that they felt was their mission, it didn't really matter what was going on in their heads after that, if there was a different or secondary reason to continue with the mission. So I guess that's why we never got there. Karen, what's this? She's commenting on the earlier Leonig book here. Leonig's Zero Fail was a good book, not just for the history of the Secret Service. Okay, so it was more extensive than Secret Service under Trump, right? Not just for the history of the Secret Service, but also for how magatized the current Secret Service has become. Yeah, and that sounds like the point of putting the book out. So it worked, at least for Karen, convinced her of Leonig's point, which is a good one. And at least, I was going to say that came out earlier, but it still came out like post-election. But as a Secret Service-focused book, I guess that's worth, it's not quite as worrisome that they waited, although, again, if it leads to concerns like how trustworthy is the Secret Service with Biden, maybe we would like to have found that out earlier. Well, anyway, what else have we got here from this story? It's the most elite protection agency in the world, if the most elite protection agency in the world is questioning whether or not Biden is president. There is a reason to be concerned, at least on the part of the transition advisors, about whether he is safe in their arms. At the end of the day, the Secret Service did change many of the supervisors of that detail, many of them to install people that Joe Biden knew from previous eras, from when he was vice president, so he would have some comfort of the familiar, comfort of people that had protected him in the past, protected Jill Biden in the past, Leonig said. And that made a whole lot of sense, independent of the Trumpification of the service. What was the ultimate disposition of the Secret Service official agent who was moved into the Trump White House to take a political role and then moved right back into the Secret Service as if he could still play some sort of nonpartisan technocratic role, Maddow asked. I had known something about that story. I had not known that he had moved back to the Secret Service as an assistant director, I guess was Leonig's answer there. All right, well, perhaps we can take Karen's recommendation and catch up with that book after you spent the weekend reading the excerpts of the latest one. But boy, that's a lot of books for somebody who's supposed to be writing elsewhere on my subscription money so that I could read it currently instead of waiting for later. But all right, well, that's the incentive system we've built for ourselves, I guess. Or I don't know. Did I build it? I don't know. Maybe I have some fault in this somewhere. You could probably convince me of that. Let's move on to some other excerpts from various writings. Let's see. I think, did this one come from yesterday's excerpting of I Alone Can Fix It, the latest Leonig book, at least touching on the subject of Trump. And there's an excerpt taken from it, of course, yesterday in the Washington Post, but probably shorter than reading that, and maybe even more entertaining than reading that, is Hunter's take on it from the front page yesterday. And it looks like his focus there was, I don't know whether it was the focus of the excerpt itself or whether he zeroed in more specifically on Ivanka Trump. Let's see, this one he wrote up yesterday afternoon under the title of New Book Excerpt Paints Ivanka as a Saint, which usually happens because most of the communication between Ivanka Trump and the press that covers her is done by PR people, I think, or trained up anyway, even if it's her directly, something she's focus grouped with PR people, I guess. But painting Ivanka as a saint, Trump himself as incapacitated, and then Mike Pence as America's hero, a conclusion I would dispute, given the fact that he went straight back to full-on Trumpism after being threatened with death. All right, so let's see what Hunter has to say about this. This seems like a good way to round things up. Oh, but of course we're heading into the break. So we'll give you the lead on this and then bring you to the edge of your seat and see where we go from there. All right, fine, whatever. It says, let's talk about the new book excerpt published in the Washington Post that attempts to put detail to Donald Trump's actions during the January 6th insurrection. In it, we learn that Donald Trump was considerably more resistant to calling off violent insurrection being mounted on his behalf than was reported earlier. And I mean, I think earlier we all thought, well, he's considerably resistant to it. He's refusing to do it until late in the day. But apparently it's even more than that. And he was considerably closer to doing mostly unspecified worse things than had been previously reported as well. So once again, we have to wait until 6 months down the road to find these things out. We hear again that Trump was completely checked out, unable and or unwilling to participate in the chain of command decisions to protect the Capitol, lawmakers, or his own vice president. We again are told that it was Mike Pence who ordered Trump's military commanders to get troops the hell over to the Capitol building right the hell now, and that Trump had no part of it. That I've believed since the beginning, of course. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, just handling the news of a near emergency travel arrangements for my son, who's on his way out the door for a week-long trip with his scout gang. So, but everything seems to be okay. But right up to the last second here, finding out this news about how his travel was nearly disrupted. Anyway, one person whose travel so far hasn't been disrupted, Ivanka Trump, flitting about the country and probably traveling internationally as well when she should, in fact, be in prison somewhere, but she's not so far. I'll read about what it is that make her look like a hero and a saint, but I'll remind you even before we get to it, my working theory, of course, the fact that Ivanka is supposedly, working behind the scenes to temper the sharp edges, and prevent the worst from what might result from her father actually running the show because he's in fact incapacitated, right? Why we're not arresting her or at least investigating her seriously for elder abuse in all of this. The idea of propping up someone who's clearly incompetent to a very important task that really bears on everyone's life, in this country and around the world, quite honestly, and propping him up so that she and her husband can continue to rake it in elsewhere and pocket the money. She's propping him up as a puppet so that she can continue to, grift and steal money all over the place, but is privately, agreeing with people like, gee whiz, please don't let him do this horrible thing because, he's crazy. Everybody knows that. But no help for the rest of us. Some saint. Well, anyway, let's see what Hunter's got for us here. The most important thing we learn from this very important new insider look, all caps there, is that absolutely everybody except for Donald Trump was being noble and patriotic and doing all the right things during this time of crisis. Phew, thank God. From Mike Pence to Mitch McConnell to an ill-described grandfather clock inside the Oval Office. Anyone who had any input on how the story was told, it turns out, an absolute damn hero. And, as usual, there was nobody more heroic than Ivanka Trump, presidential daughter and official White House crazy person wrangler, who was super duper against the 2-month effort to overthrow America's democracy, and who only stuck close to Donald as he gave insurrection-baiting speeches and visibly unraveled inside the Oval Office because, as an American, it was her patriotic duty to keep her obviously insane father from escalating things to the point of civil war. Or, obviously, coming from our same point of view here, but more seriously, I would guess her job she viewed as keeping her obviously insane father from escalating things to the point where she might be apprehended or beheaded or disinherited or any of the various fates that might have awaited her depending on who, decided to take out vengeance against her, whether it was her own father or her siblings or the American people. But basically, I just want to keep a lid on things so that we don't descend into civil war and my assets aren't seized, or the dollar isn't devalued, or whatever it is, or my passport isn't revoked, or I don't become international persona non grata with nowhere to land my jet when I abscond from the United States. That's the chief concern, I'm sure. Reading through the account, the most surprising thing is that Ivanka never got her golden halo caught on any of the White House chandeliers. She must have walked very carefully. Anywho, Ivanka wants readers to know that she was, quote, upset. Oh no, not upset, with Rudy Giuliani's advice to her father that Mike Pence be made to overthrow American government. Ivanka wants you to know that both Keith Kellogg and the aforementioned grandfather clock can vouch for her being opposed to the whole let's do a treason plan. I guess I really need to, I guess you need to actually have read the excerpts to understand what's going on, but I get the idea. She was only at the January 6th rally because she needed to keep, quote, tending to her father, who was off his damn rocker at that point, and not because she was an active participant in the family's seditious plans. Melania could not make it to the event because, and this is the actual damn excuse used, she needed to oversee a previously scheduled photo shoot of White House rugs. Sure, any excuse to get out of it. And if you opted for an excuse to get out of it, you're smart. That's not a bad thing. Of course, I don't know why they have to do a photo shoot of the White House rugs at all, but let's say it's a legitimate thing. Scheduling it for January 6th, though, you had 4 years. At what point were you going to take care of this important task, right? You had photo shoots of everything else already. Anyway, while Melania wants you to know that glamour shots of the building's carpeting was absolutely more important to her than keeping her delusional, traitorous husband in check, Mike Pence wants you to know that he was practically Bruce Willis in Die Hard. He was practically, sometimes you got to read the sentence first here. He was practically Bruce Willis in Die Hard levels of kick-ass that day. Okay. Refusing to be evacuated from the Capitol safe zone so that he could do his patriotic duty of helping to certify the election once somebody, somewhere, could be convinced to resecure the building by driving out the rioting insurrectionists. So, I guess one read of what was going on was that Pence wasn't that he was afraid to get in the car because he thought he would be murdered by the Secret Service detail that was taking him away, but that he was bravely, I don't know whether he was going to re-storm the building or anything like that, but he was not going to let himself be driven from the building so that when order was restored, he was on hand to do his, constitutional duty. Why that couldn't happen by driving him back to the Capitol later on, I don't know. But that's, I guess, what makes me believe that maybe there really is something to the other perspective on things, that he didn't want to get in the car. And it's not entirely clear where that interpretation of things comes from, but that's the conclusion that was drawn in the Crooks and Liars tweet that drew me to their write-up of their interpretation of Nicole Wallace's interpretation of the excerpt from the book that was written 6 months too late. All right. Inside the Pentagon, the role of sort of maybe hero goes to Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair General Mark Milley. We talked about this one yesterday, who had not only decided he would not agree to, quote, do a coup in presidential parlance, and pressured acting Defense Secretary Chris Miller to maybe do your effing job at some point by mobilizing the National Guard. I'm still puzzled by this, and I'm still puzzled by why more people aren't talking about the fact that if the senior Pentagon brass was in fact worried about a Reichstag moment in the days and weeks leading up to January 6th, how it happened that there was no faster response from the Pentagon when the Reichstag situation actually presented itself. Still, I can't believe that that's not issue number one for reporters and analysts being interviewed about this excerpt from the book. But apparently it's not. Miller himself, Chris Miller, appears to have not spoken to the reporters, I guess the ones who wrote the book, and he is not portrayed then as a ripplingly muscled patriot, but continues to look and said like an incompetent, bumbling, maybe accomplice to the day's violence. It was Pence who finally ordered Miller to take his head out of the secure confines of his own ass. Too late to do anybody much good. It is important to take no accounts of, quote, what happened inside the Trump White House at face value, and this book excerpt is a fine example of that. We can easily interpret this version of history being put down here as the version of history that the Trump-adjacent louts most eager to speak to the reporter who would like to see prevail. And there's absolutely no question that most of the sourcing here comes from Ivanka Trump, Mark Milley, Mike Pence, and or their immediate aides. It is all too perfect, too tailored, and in each case straddles the line of what we can plausibly believe, given that each has a history of meeting Trump's assaults on democracy with either public silence or displays that can be reasonably interpreted as complicity. Mike Pence putting that on right now before our eyes. Silence, though, on the Ivanka Trump front from this. But even in these most self-serving of accounts, all involved agree that Donald Trump himself was glued to the television, not particularly put out by the riots or the violence, resistant to all staff pleas to help curb the violence, and so incapacitated that it was essentially Ivanka Trump's job throughout to act as nursemaid, continually calming her irrational father and attempting to rein in his demands as he himself repeatedly twitched toward escalating the situation. That's the good interpretation of the day. That's the interpretation that even Trump's own favorite daughter wants to put out to the world to explain things. The whole story revolves around Trump's top allies watching him push sedition and contemplate doing even worse. And the heroism of the story is, well, at least we got through that. Nobody directly opposed Trump. Nobody told him to go to hell. During their angriest moments, a few Republican senators referred to him mostly obliquely as a cause of the violence that they were denouncing, before joining ranks to block all further attempts to either investigate or punish his acts. The good story here is that Donald Trump was, by January 6th, so incapacitated that he could not make decisions, so traitorous that he refused to condemn a violent insurrection on his behalf, organized by his own allies, and so dysfunctioning that his adult daughter had to repeatedly intervene after his staff lost all ability to calm him. That's the cleaned up version that his longest serving allies are freely admitting to. The true version is assuredly much, much worse. And there's still no assurance that we'll ever hear it because Ivanka, Pence, and other top allies have been tight-lipped about most of Trump's private musings. The more details come out, the more things Trump's staff have to explain away as they continue to justify their own support for a clearly incapacitated and incompetent sociopath. Why were Milley and other military leaders so convinced that a coup was a distinct possibility? What were the ideas that Ivanka Trump spent the day of the insurrection repeatedly trying to talk Trump out of? There's more to this than we're being told. Still. And I don't know, maybe you have to wait a year after this 6 months in order to get news on what those things actually are. Or maybe we'll just never find out. I don't know. Very interesting, to say the least, and but not enough to make me buy the book. I'll let Greg take care of that. If I buy the book, it's just an ornament. It's just going to sit around, and I'm going to read these things. I'll be reading other people's reaction to them before I sit down and read through the book. I don't think I could take the book. I mean, I would explode. I don't think I could sit down and just read that without I don't know what. All right, let's see. Other items up for consideration. Back to the pure politics of things. Greg sent me a couple of things yesterday. More about what was going on in Arizona. And I also have here, was this something that I feel like Greg might have sent me this one maybe through a different channel. But back to, like I said, to the pure Hill politics, not the insurrection on the Hill politics, but the business as usual on the Hill after the insurrection. This from Politico, interestingly titled, Pigs Fly, McConnell weighs giving Biden a bipartisan win. More on what's been going on in the last week or so and what we expect to see by next week on, I guess, the 105th consecutive infrastructure week next week. Subheader here reads, the self-appointed Senate GOP Grim Reaper, that's McConnell, has aired remarkably little criticism of the physical infrastructure deal that his members helped negotiate. So the BIF continues, at least on life support. For the moment, McConnell not doing much to stand in the way, at the very least, of that part of the non-deal, because the two things aren't related at all. Burgess Everett and Marianne Levine reporting this yesterday. Something strange is happening in Washington. Mitch McConnell might go along with a central piece of Joe Biden's agenda. Essentially, I guess, the thesis here being the politics of the situation just line up such that there's no particular upside in opposing this. Maybe, I guess, this is like the flip side of the same coin that Greg posited that Perry Bacon, PBJ, Perry Bacon Jr., was discussing the other day. I guess it was Wednesday, and then we revisited a little bit on Thursday. That is the idea that Manchin and Sinema, having staked out this position as mavericks among the Democrats, needed to reestablish, or might need at this point to reestablish the last part of that claim. Democrats, they can remain mavericks, but at some point, if you just oppose and just hold yourself out in opposition to mainstream Democratic positions, then people start to wonder, are you a maverick because you're actually a Republican, or might as well be? But your leverage only really, remains if you continue to call yourself a Democrat, and sometimes you got to come back and put yourself back in line so that you're still the Democrat everybody needs to capture, as opposed to just another Republican in opposition who's, the likelihood of support from whom is just written off. Not to mention, of course, the loss of control of the chamber. So he's not going to be interested in doing that. But, there's a minimum amount of performative Democratic senator-ness that they'll have to put out there. And I guess similarly here, McConnell may find that the opportunity to retake control of the Senate, in his view, may depend on moderating occasionally and that this one might look like a good one to do it on. After all, a lot of money will land in Kentucky and other key states where Republican senators might be running for re-election or looking to unseat someone else, and they can, claim some credit if they either vote for it or don't stand in the way of it at the very least. So, where were we with this? The self-appointed Grim Reaper of the Senate, a minority leader who said just 2 months ago that 100% of my focus is on standing up to this administration, has been remarkably circumspect about the Senate's bipartisan infrastructure deal. He's privately telling his members to separate that effort from Democrats' party line $3.5 trillion spending plan and publicly observed there's a decent chance for its success. Other than questioning its financing, McConnell has aired little criticism of the bipartisan agreement to fund roads, bridges, and other physical infrastructure, even as he panned Democrats' separate spending plans on Wednesday as, quote, wildly out of proportion given the nation's inflation rate. Yes, I did see at some point that he was complaining about the measure being budget busting, which, is just like lingo that people turn, fling around all the time to convey the idea that too much money was being spent. That's what makes something budget busting. But I did note in passing on Twitter, as somebody said, that the bill you're talking about, the $3.5 trillion bill, it's not a bill, it's a resolution, of course, but it's the budget resolution. It will lead later to a reconciliation bill, but it's the budget resolution. And, that's just one of those definitional problems. Like, the budget can't be budget busting. It's the budget. You see what I mean here? It could be debt busting, I suppose, or debt increasing, but you can't bust the budget with a budget. It might not be a good idea to budget so much spending. That is I understand that that's a concept that you can express, but you can't say that you're going to bust the budget with a large budget. It is the budget. I mean, if you stick to it exactly, then you've come in on budget. If you cut it to $3.4 trillion, you've come in under budget. It's only budget busting if you, budget for $3.5 trillion and spend 3.6. But okay. That's not going to change his mind, though maybe they could get a clearer statement out of him next time. All right. So back to McConnell here. His cautious approach to a top Biden priority reflects the divide among Senate Republicans over whether to collaborate with Democrats on part of the president's spending plans while fighting tooth and nail on the rest. Many Democrats predict McConnell will kill the agreement after stringing out talks for weeks. That's the usual MO. But the current infrastructure talks are particularly sensitive for the GOP leader because one of his close allies, Ohio Senator Rob Portman, is the senior Republican negotiator. He'll throw him under the bus. The question is, will they pay for a new bus? That's infrastructure. McConnell is aware of the conventional wisdom, or rather, I guess, pay for a new road for the bus to travel over. If the road's too bumpy, what if you bounce over Rob Portman's body when it's tossed under there? You got to have smooth pavement. That's the hard infrastructure that they're talking about. McConnell is aware of the conventional wisdom that he will ultimately knife the deal and is taking pains not to become the face of its opposition. He doesn't like being too predictable, I guess. He usually is the brunt of the demonization of the other side. It really bears the brunt, but okay. That was John Cornyn speaking, and he's just never really all that exact in his language. I don't think he is Dr. No when it comes to all legislation. Not all legislation, he wants you to know. For the moment, at least, McConnell's approach marks a shift from his past strategy of blocking Democratic priorities to portray the governing party as chaotic and inefficient. Advisors say he understands the bipartisan appeal of infrastructure and views it as less ideological than other Democratic priorities. The Kentucky Republican is also perceptive of moments when his power is limited, evidenced by his 2013 decision to oppose, but not try to defeat, his members' immigration compromise with Democrats. He also sent emissaries out in the past to engage with Democrats on health care and the deficit, efforts that eventually failed. Even Democrats who've harshly criticized McConnell noticed a shift in tactics in recent weeks. Senator Chris Murphy said the Republican leader's strategy feels different this time around. His problem is that many of his members like what's in it, Murphy said. McConnell is going to have a hard time keeping his caucus together if he decides to oppose it. Of course, they call it a conference, but never mind that. Senator Tester from Montana, who helped negotiate the bipartisan framework, was skeptical that McConnell would sink it, given that Democrats could simply then fold the failed cross-aisle deal into their larger partisan package. That would be, of course, the reconciliation bill to come. I don't think it would be smart for him to do that, so I don't think he will, Tester said. It's better for them to try to pass the bipartisan bill and let the Democrats fight it out on the $3.5 trillion bill. McConnell could take a similar tactic this summer to his 2013 play on immigration, opposing the deal without whipping against it. But there's a flip side to the squeeze he's feeling, and it's coming from the right. Conservatives are increasingly leaning on the Senate GOP to rip up the bipartisan deal and kill its attempt to pour $40 billion into increased IRS enforcement. That's what, out of the whole thing, that's what bothers them. Former President Donald Trump has trashed the deal as well, but he's crazy and stupid. And many Republican senators worry they are stepping into a trap by agreeing to an infrastructure deal that will help Biden pass a larger spending bill, one designed to increase taxes on the wealthy while expanding social programs. No. And policies to fight climate change. Oh no. At a closed-door Tuesday lunch, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin bluntly asked his party what working with Democrats will get the GOP in the end. Attendees said. McConnell later responded that Republicans can't control Democrats' separate spending plans, urging his party to look at Portman's efforts as separate from the multi-trillion-dollar package Biden's party plans to pass without GOP votes. Well, glue him to that position now so that he can't later go back to the false linkage story. Asked afterward if that argument appeals to him, Johnson responded, no. Okay. All I see is a greater chance for much larger deficits. Oh no, not those. I'm not on board with this strategy of let's do this and complicate their ability to pass reconciliation. I don't agree with that. Republican proponents of the bipartisan infrastructure plan, however, argue that the GOP has nothing to lose by supporting it. Doing so, they say, lets the 50-vote minority put its stamp on a physical infrastructure proposal that doesn't include tax hikes, and later put vulnerable Democrats on the spot for supporting the $3.5 trillion tax and spend package, as they are labeling it. I mean, the bipartisan infrastructure one is also a tax and spend package, but they just don't like to call it that, so it isn't one. Even if he ultimately sides against the deal, McConnell is cognizant that being too heavy-handed in bringing it down carries risks. Much more likely, allies say, is that a handful of Republican senators who initially endorsed the accord end up balking at Democrats' big spending plans and the bipartisan deal's rocky revenue sources. McConnell's top deputy on Wednesday winced at Democrats' plan to marry the nearly $600 billion in new spending on roads and bridges with that $3.5 trillion GOP-free package of spending to fight climate change and expand Medicare, a.k.a. the federal budget, by the way. I want to try and look at the infrastructure bill on its own. But it's lawfully, but it says awfully, but it looks like lawfully because all you need to do is add that little L there. But it's awfully hard to, I guess, again, look at the infrastructure bill on its own when they continue to link them publicly, not to view them through that lens, said Senate Minority Whip John Thune of South Dakota. That complicates passage of the infrastructure bill for a lot of Republicans, even though you vote on them one at a time, guys. I mean, they're linked in the sense that, well, both will touch on infrastructure in different ways, but I don't know. The linkage is just so tenuous. And of course, you only get to vote on one of them at a time. And if you're opposed to one and supportive of the other, you vote that way. You can't help the fact that other people who are going to vote yes on both think of them as linked. You can't force them not to be linked. And who cares anyway? They're still going to vote to pass the thing. And if it's passing under reconciliation, then there's nothing you can do about it. But whatever. It's a procedural excuse for opposing doing the right thing. Democrats view Thune's comment as a harbinger of McConnell's eventual position. Jeff Merkley of Oregon, a frequent McConnell antagonist, said the fact that he's quiet now means he's not sure of the lay of the land. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and all he does is oppose, and I don't anticipate this will be any different, said Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii. Republican negotiators say that thus far they have not sensed resistance from McConnell. Some proponents of the deal took it as a positive signal that he advised them to evaluate the bipartisan plan separately from the Democrats' social spending plan. Susan Collins, deeply troubled, described the GOP leader, so often opposed to all of Democrats' big ideas, as very open-minded. You know, it takes her a long while to get that out. He has encouraged us to proceed, she said. He is not committed one way or the other, which is understandable because we don't have a final product. That's true. That's a good point. On Thursday, a bipartisan group was hoping to finalize the framework it laid out at the end of June. It's unlikely McConnell will weigh in, however, until they release legislative text and the Congressional Budget Office rules on whether the proposed financing mechanisms actually pay for the legislation. So we wait to see whether or not that comes to pass, and I think the latest was that Chuck Schumer was saying that he was prepared to push a vote on Wednesday, I guess, on proceeding with things. I imagine a motion to proceed to consideration of this budget resolution, I guess, which would be the next thing up as soon as Wednesday. Republicans complaining they didn't get a heads up, though, so boo-hoo. All right, welcome now back to the Kagro in the Morning Show. What the hell is the name of the show, and where are we doing again? Ah, yes, Networks Radio. Okay, I just was searching for the source of the information that there would be a vote on Wednesday of next week. It was a tweet from Burgess Everett, part of the team that brought you the previous article, tweeting, big news after months of negotiations. Schumer says Senate will vote to advance toward bipartisan infrastructure bill on Wednesday of next week. Hardball move to force agreement by then. No agreement expected today when he tweeted this yesterday. We'll need 60 votes, 10 Republicans, of course, to advance. So, well, that's true. So there you go. All right, let's see. Next up here, and where do we go with this? Let's see. There's a couple of things to do. Let's jump back just for a second to, I mentioned to you that there had been reports of the death of William Bill Regnery, whose name you might recognize from our frequent discussions of right-wing publishing world. This came to my attention from Christopher Mathias tweeting about it. Mathias, senior reporter with HuffPost, and including the Huffington Post's writing in the past about William Regnery II. And I think we may even have read that article at the time as part of our ongoing discussions about right-wing publishing world. Mathias here tweeting, obit for a rich, evil man. William Regnery II, a reclusive multimillionaire who used his inherited family fortune to finance vile fascist groups in the hopes of one day forming an American whites-only ethno-state, has died. He was 80 years old. I suppose you could say he led a long and rich life. He was certainly rich, and it was a little too long, I think, but not as long as it could be. We have that going for us. I think, if I recall correctly, was he one of the major financiers also of Turning Point? You know, in is he the guy who basically has paid for propping up Charlie Kirk, or was that someone else? I can't remember. We could take a look back at the article that Mathias includes in this initial tweet here. just for fun. Let's open it up. This is, okay, I thought this was one of his old reports on Regnery and what he was up to. This is actually the obit. William Regnery II, reclusive millionaire who financed American fascists, dead at 80. The avowed white nationalist inherited millions from his prominent Republican family and used the money to fund the rise of the so-called alt-right, on top of sitting atop the publishing scheme. He also spent a lot of the money that he made through that publishing company on financing, right, like we said, alt-right groups and activities, not just by paying their leaders advances and publishing their books in order to finance their work. There was apparently much more. So let's see. How long is the... this gives a pretty significant look at his background, but maybe that's a way to go here, because I've got another story waiting in the wings about right-wing book publishing. A piece published in Slate yesterday before we got the news of Regnery's death, called Inside the Conservative Book Publishing World. Not that salacious a title, too, but I guess the salaciousness is the books that they're publishing, not necessarily Regnery alone, but the latest coming out from Kellyanne Conway. Mike Pence is going to put out a book. Josh Hawley's book that got picked up and then canceled by some of the other major imprints out there. So maybe this would make good background for this. William H. Regnery II, a racist, reclusive millionaire, you get to do this in HuffPost, who used his inherited fortune to finance vile white supremacist groups in the hopes of one day forming an American whites-only ethno-state, died instead of achieving that goal, I guess. But he moved himself closer to it. I'm sure he died happy, and I'm happy he died. So, we're even on that score. Regnery, whose family amassed riches from its right-wing publishing empire, died on July 2nd in Florida. Oh, so it's not even all that recent. Well, terrific. After a long battle with cancer, also terrific, his cousin Alfred, the former head of Regnery Publishing, confirmed to HuffPost. Asked if he'd like to comment on his cousin's life and legacy, Alfred Regnery replied, "No, it's all been said before." It has. In the final 2 decades of his life, William Regnery funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars, and likely much more, to extremist groups. He is often credited with being one of the main funders of the so-called alt-right, the resurgent fascist movement that gained momentum during the rise of former President Donald Trump. William Regnery's sordid influence was felt from the deadly Charlottesville Unite the Right rally to the January 6th storming of the Capitol, said Tarso Luis Ramos, executive director of Political Research Associates, a social justice think tank that monitors the far right. His patronage of white nationalists over more than 2 decades helped popularize a genocidal vision for a white ethno-state on North American soil, and sinking fear of racial replacement in the hearts of a growing portion of white American population. Ramos added, "This vision will not prevail, but it won't either be easily extinguished." Not as easily as he was extinguished, anyway. HuffPost first learned of Regnery's death on Twitter, where some of the many avowed white nationalists permitted on that platform, note to self, mourned their benefactor's passing. Which they probably really didn't. They probably were in for a big inheritance, actually. Bill Regnery was a good man who cared about the future. No, he wasn't. As they say, did something about it. Tweeted, Richard Spencer. Remember him, the dapper Nazi that everyone loves to punch? The racist who led the National Policy Institute, a white nationalist organization Regnery founded. "I'll light a cigar for Bill tonight," added Spencer. "Rest in power, friend." Someone should put it out in his eyeball, just as a suggestion. Kevin MacDonald, perhaps America's foremost anti-Semite. I did not realize that. Congratulations, Kevin, who authored a series of books claiming that Jews are genetically hardwired to destroy Western civilization. No wonder I've been so tired lately. Also tweeted that he hoped Regnery would rest in peace. MacDonald and Spencer are both members of the Charles Martel Society, a secretive organization of prominent American fascists, founded and funded with nearly $90,000 donated from family charities and other tax-exempt organizations, which shouldn't be tax-exempt, affiliated with Regnery. Nonprofits are not legally required to identify individual donors, by the way, so it's possible Regnery personally donated much more. The Society publishes the Occidental Quarterly, a journal for which MacDonald serves as editor. Other white nationalists who weren't direct benefits of Regnery's largesse also expressed sadness at his passing, hoping they would get a piece of it, I guess. Extremely sad to hear that heroic William H. Bill Regnery has passed, tweeted Peter Brimelow, maybe, the founder of the white nationalist foundation VDARE. My friend and a true hero, wrote James Edwards, host of the white nationalist radio show The Political Cesspool. He set a sterling example for the rest of us to follow, and upon his shoulders we stand. And upon his grave we could all stand now. Regnery, who went by Bill, was born February 25th, 1941, into a prominent Republican family. His grandfather and namesake, textile magnate William H. Regnery I, was a founding member of the infamous America First Committee, the organization led by anti-Semitic aviator Charles Lindbergh. It's important to have aviators of all kinds, I think. Opposed America's intervention in World War II and counted many Nazi sympathizers among its ranks. In 1947, Bill Regnery's uncle, Henry, founded Regnery Publishing, which would grow into one of the most influential right-wing media dynasties in America. It's dynasties for you in the UK. In its early years, the company published prominent conservative thinkers, including William F. Buckley, a racist and segregationist, and Robert Welch, founder of the John Birch Society, the anti-communist conspiracist group, who should also probably be labeled racist and segregationist. More recently, it has published anti-Muslim bigots Robert Spencer and David Horowitz, and anti-immigrant crusaders Ann Coulter and Michelle Malkin, as well as books from Republican senators and other politicians, including Donald Trump's 2015 Time to Get Tough. When Henry Regnery died in 1996, the New York Times eulogized him as the godfather of modern conservatism, which they shouldn't have done. They should have celebrated his death, as we're doing today. The Regnery's family's influence extended beyond the publishing world. Bill Regnery's cousin Alfred was an official at the Department of Justice under President Ronald Reagan before eventually taking over the family publishing company. Bill Regnery started showing an interest in politics while a student in the early 1960s at the University of Pennsylvania, where he launched a conservative student magazine. He never graduated from Penn, however, telling BuzzFeed News in an extensive 2017 interview that he was still a couple credits short of a degree. I guess that didn't happen either. He said he left to work for the 1964 presidential campaign of Barry Goldwater, the far-right senator from Arizona. Sounds about right. As BuzzFeed News described, Regnery claimed to have hatched a bizarre scheme to suppress Democratic votes on Election Day that year. Here's the description. His most memorable effort, he claimed, was a convoluted scheme he called Operation Dewdrop, intended to suppress Democratic voters in Philadelphia. At the time, he explained, the theory was that Democrats voted less in the rain. So, on Election Day, he said, he tried to seed rain clouds by using dry ice and a twin-engine airplane. Charles Lindbergh flew it, I guess, I don't know. It didn't rain, he recalled, but he burned his fingers from the dry ice canisters, a detail that helps add a ring of authenticity. Goldwater lost to Lyndon Johnson in a landslide. Plus, he burned his fingers, and I wish he had just licked the canisters at that point. But he didn't. Such bizarre failures and embarrassments seem to have marked Regnery's life. Hooray. According to Alfred and another cousin, Frederick Myers, he nearly ruined the family's textile business, and the family forced him to resign as president in 1981, court records show. In the early 1990s, Regnery became disillusioned with mainstream American conservatism, seeing it as insufficiently concerned about race, according to a memoir he published in 2015, Left Behind, a copy of which Mother Jones reviewed. It's linked in here if you want to look. It horrified him that whites might one day be a minority in America. In December of 1999, Regnery convened a conference for prominent white nationalists at a hotel in Florida, where he declared his belief in breaking up the United States into a series of enclaves based on race and religion, a plan that would undoubtedly involve the violent ethnic cleansing of non-whites. In closing, I charge the participants of this conference with the sacred task of beginning to secure for our children's children a proper home, Regnery said at the conference. I charge him with treason. 2 years later, in 2001, he founded the Charles Martel Society, named for the 8th century Frankish ruler of the modern far right often glorifies for defending Gaul in modern-day France from an invading Arab army. Whoop-de-doo. Regnery staffed the organization with a who's who of infamous white supremacists, including Sam Francis, who once suggested, quote, imposing adequate fertility controls on non-whites. What a guy. In 2004, Regnery tried to launch a whites-only dating website. I believe that's called farmersonly.com. No, but maybe. I don't know, actually. Maybe it is. An effort he hoped would increase the number of white families, since the survival of our race depends upon our people marrying, reproducing, and parenting. And I'm pretty sure people were trying to, maybe not necessarily reproduce, but at least go through the motions, even without your incentivizing it. Okay, whatever. In 2005, he founded the innocuous-sounding National Policy Institute, except that it was, in fact, a white nationalist think tank on a mission to elevate the consciousness of whites by studying the consequences of the ongoing influx that non-Western populations pose to our national identity. Wink, wink. Not really. It's bullhorn. But anyway, this paranoia over immigration from non-white countries into America and Europe, often called the Great Replacement Theory, has animated multiple white supremacist massacres in recent years. I chuckle because we have to use the term massacres. Geez. Including those in Pittsburgh, El Paso, and Charleston, South Carolina. And they were indeed massacres. Well put there. According to a BuzzFeed News tally, nonprofits and other tax-exempt organizations affiliated with Regnery poured nearly $500,000 into NPI's coffers from 2005 to 2015, though Regnery himself could have personally donated more. Regnery seemed content to be the money man behind NPI and the Charles Martel Society, working quietly behind the scenes. Where his relatives have headed corporations, held public office, and run high-profile civic groups, the younger William works hard to keep his activities out of the public eye, the Southern Poverty Law Center once wrote of Regnery, adding that while his family members worked to cultivate an air of mainstream respectability, William ran headlong into the fever swamps of white nationalism, where his familial and financial clout allowed him to set himself up as a major force shaping the entire movement. Regnery tapped Richard Spencer to lead NPI in 2011. In Spencer, Regnery found someone who relished the limelight. Also from a wealthy conservative family, Spencer had pursued a doctorate at Duke University while making inroads among right-wing extremists, writing for numerous publications, including the American Conservative. Spencer launched 2 websites, AlternativeRight.com and RadixJournal.com, which eventually became important propaganda outlets for the so-called alt-right, a term Spencer claims to have coined himself to describe the growing online coalition of racists, including trolls and, crap posters, the S word that they use for that, neo-Nazis and Klansmen, Holocaust deniers, and suit-and-tie fascists. When Trump launched his presidential campaign in 2015, he often mimicked alt-right talking points, such as calling Mexican immigrants rapists and proposing a ban on Muslims entering the United States. The chief executive of Trump's campaign, Steve Bannon, had previously run Breitbart News, which, of course, he described as a platform for the alt-right. As Trump's poll numbers rose and the size of his rallies swelled, the media clamored to explain what the alt-right was and often found a willing spokesman in Spencer, who gave interviews to almost anyone who would ask. He quickly became the face of the far right in America. In 2016, Regnery boasted in a speech that tapping Spencer to lead NPI secured my place in history. Regnery and the American white nationalist movement were jubilant when Trump was elected president. At an NPI conference in Washington, D.C. a few weeks after the election, Spencer shouted, "Hail Trump and hail victory," the English translation of the Nazi cry, Sieg Heil. Right, okay. His supporters responded with Nazi salutes. Cassie Miller, a research analyst at the Southern Poverty Law Center, told Huffington Post that Regnery's material contributions helped build networks of racist activists and a large body of pseudoscientific literature that he hoped would legitimize his calls to build a white ethno-state. Miller said two of the major organizations he built, Charles Martel and NPI, were once highly influential, but noted that the NPI is now, quote, in disarray. So no longer just the Dems that are in disarray. It appears to no longer be operational, and its death knell likely came earlier this year when a judge ordered NPI to pay $2.4 million in damages to an Ohio man injured at the Unite the Right rally for his physical and emotional suffering, Miller said. Spencer and the NPI helped organize the infamous Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. You remember all about that. In the following months, the NPI organized a few free speech rallies. Remember when they were for free speech? Now they're for cancellation, of course, of free speech on various college campuses, but were often confronted and humiliated by counter-protesters. And now they're gone. What do you know? Widespread anti-fascist organizing, lawsuits, and law enforcement crackdowns have started undoing much of the alt-right that Regnery and Spencer helped build, but their rise did not come without consequences. Regnery's real legacy is not what he built, but the immense harm that he caused, Miller said. His death was announced on the website of Lemon Bay Funeral Home and Cremation Services in Englewood, Florida, not far from his house in Boca Grande. So there you go. That secured his place in history after all. No big glowing obit, but an announcement of his death from Lemon Bay Funeral Home and Cremation Services. Okay, sure. I guess, well, you know, he probably wasn't looking for that, but I'll take it. Now I wanted to switch over to the Slate piece that I think will follow up on it and probably make some mention on it, but then expand on conservative book publishing in general. Laura Miller, writing at Slate, Inside the Conservative Book Publishing World. The subheader here is a pull quote. "That doesn't mean that I don't have colleagues who secretly wish that none of my books were being published." I think that's Josh Hawley. And they should have just left it for down below. In recent years, the conservative imprints at the major New York publishing houses, not Regnery, have been put under a microscope. Simon & Schuster canceled its contracts with Milo Yiannopoulos and Josh Hawley in response to public outcry and in-house protests, while refusing to comply with similar demands regarding Kellyanne Conway and Mike Pence. I guess they were considered suit and tie enough to go ahead with. Kate Hartson, former editorial director of the Center Street imprint at the Hachette Book Group, I don't even know exactly who we're talking about here, maintains that she was fired earlier this year for her pro-Trump politics. Last month, Hartson and Louise Burke, former publisher of Simon & Schuster's conservative imprint, announced the launch of All Seasons Press, a new independent conservative press like Regnery, the publisher that picked up Hawley's book and then died. You know, I'm just saying. They agreed to publish Josh Hawley's book and then the guy died. Maybe that's meaningful. Could these developments mark the migration of conservative book publishing from the mainstream houses to smaller companies? Not if they die, it doesn't. And what might be the unintended consequences of such a shift? To find out how this potential change looks from the inside, or rather from inside the industry, I called Eric Nelson, the VP and executive editor of Broadside Books, an imprint of HarperCollins dedicated to publishing books by political conservatives. He joined Broadside the day after Donald Trump's inauguration, after working for the conservative and business imprints at Penguin Random House. So, just a reminder that major publishers, Simon & Schuster, do, you know, like regular, normal, respectable books, and when they have too hot to handle Republican, conservative, crazy books, they move them over to subsidiaries that they call different, Broadside or whatever else here. Penguin Random House does the same thing. They basically, you know, what they're saying is they won't put their brand name behind the books because they know they're garbage. So anyway, I guess the rest of this is an interview with this guy, Eric Nelson, VP of Broadside Books. There is some more mention of Regnery in here, but maybe this doesn't go exactly where I was thinking the story would go. Let's take a little bit of a look at what's going on here. Slate, or the author here, referring to herself not as by herself as Laura Miller. She's working for Slate, so she's Slate in this dialogue. Slate asking, why did you personally choose to work at conservative imprints? And because I'm conservative, I guess. I realized how rare that knowledge was in the industry, to know the difference between the conservative magazines, or the difference between a good 11 a.m. Fox host and a good 11 p.m. Fox host. Is it rare because it doesn't matter? I don't know. I thought that not only could I do a good job by concentrating on this, but that there was a lot of room for improvement in the quality of the books. Too bad about that. Why did major book publishers start conservative imprints in the early 2000s? In the 90s, if you had a book, he says, that was for what we now think of as Red America, publishers would worry that there were no bookstores in the towns where the audience for this was. Nielsen BookScan proved that not only could these people buy books, imagine believing they couldn't, they could buy lots and lots of books, but so could mass or PACs would just buy the stuff in bulk and then store it and maybe give it away in exchange for donations later on. That was the chief model of Republican or conservative book imprints to begin with. I wonder if he acknowledges any of that in here. So big publishers saw that either smaller presses like Regnery were having success with conservative titles, or that the few conservative titles from the big houses were doing well, and they decided to publish more of them. But tell me why they decided to establish special imprints for them. You needed an editor who knew that world. When Threshold started at Simon & Schuster, they hired Mary Madeline to help bring in authors and make sure that their books were being marketed properly. Someone who, say, knew that talk radio was a good way to move books in the 2000s. That was a world that people in New York media didn't know anything about. Do you really think so? I think they knew that. It sounds to me, basically, and it's enough to make me maybe abandon reading through the interview, he's doing everything he can to avoid acknowledging that the reason that major publishers started conservative imprints is because they didn't want to sully the parent brand name with the garbage that was normally published by garbage publishing houses like Regnery. Anyway, so instead the excuse is, well, you need an editor who knows what they're doing and understands that world. Geniuses who could decide such things as, why don't we put our authors on the radio where they'll be heard by our target audience? And I think marketers actually knew that already. And I guess to her credit, the next follow-up question is, okay, so why not just hire an editor who could do that? Why a separate imprint? Let's see what he says to this. I definitely had the sense from the outside that they were trying to keep the brands separate. Sort of. People were not excited about publishing the next Rush Limbaugh as part of the same list that included prestige fiction authors, or nonfiction for that matter. And so there was a sense of maybe it would be better if people weren't 100% aware that Threshold is part of Simon & Schuster. There you go. Finally, at least the acknowledgement of what's going on. But and then that's the end of the inquiry. Do the books you edit appeal to you politically, or is that not relevant to you as an editor? Whatever. The older I get, the more concerned I am about the health of our democracy, and so I do feel like every day I go to work, I help a smart person make a more coherent and truthful argument. It's better for our country. Well, okay, that's garbage. Okay, but there are plenty of people who could say that and then would add, oh, but I wouldn't want to work for a conservative imprint because it's against my own values. To which he answers, no, it's my own values. I'm a libertarian, so it usually is obvious to me what's awful about both parties. Not really. You're a libertarian, which means you're a Republican and that you enjoy publishing this garbage. That much we can figure out. All right. So I don't know. I would say maybe the rest of the interview is not necessarily, whoops, wrong one. I didn't want to freak you out. Wrong one again, as a matter of fact. There, that one sounds the same. Oh boy, now we're in trouble. We're like 6 seconds behind on this stuff. All right, just explaining myself as we'll prepare you for my exiting at the wrong point, or what sounds like the wrong point in the music. All right, yeah, I guess I can't be thinking too much about whether or not I'm going to go back to this interview. It looks like it's rather long, and it doesn't really look like he's willing to tell us what's really embarrassing about these imprints, so whatever. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. A little bit late in getting back here. I'm going to skip down a little further. Some of the rest of this stuff is, some self-serving garbage. What are you going to do? However, they get back to the idea of Regnery and their practices a little bit later when the question is posed, what is your argument for conservative books being published by imprints in major houses versus by smaller specialty publishers? When Josh Hawley's book contract was canceled by Simon & Schuster, he went to Regnery. As a result, many people who objected to Hawley have pointed out that he wasn't censored. But will there be unforeseen consequences of a shift like that if more and more of these people start publishing with independent conservative presses? And I thought that was actually kind of a weak conclusion to the question, giving them a way out of discussing it. But it progresses. He answers, something that was really instructive to me at the end of the Trump administration was the growth of Parler. The idea was that if Twitter and Facebook start limiting the things you can talk about, then Americans will lose interest in talking about those things. And one of those things was whether or not the election was stolen. And what we got, instead of turning down the temperature, was an insurrection that started among the kinds of people on Parler. So blocking ideas out of the mainstream doesn't reduce what ideas are acceptable to the American public. It probably actually grows them. It encourages more conspiracy theories. I'm not certain I actually agree with that, but it comes back around here. Another question: what you are implying is that a smaller, independent, purely conservative press might not have the same quality control you provide with your imprint? He says yes, and of course that's the biggest setup in the world. Oh, well, my books are, quality conservative books. But then she says, okay, can you give an example of that? Not really, but the one he gives is a story that I've mentioned frequently is that most conservatives got the impression from social media that Joe Biden said that Donald Trump's policy of ending direct flights from China during the early days of the pandemic was xenophobic. In fact, Biden constantly called Trump xenophobic in his stump speech, and he wasn't referencing that specific policy. This is a little thing, but gets mentioned offhand in manuscript after manuscript I'm editing. Usually, when I point out to the authors that it didn't go down the way they thought it did, they get rid of it. This isn't quite fact-checking, but it is not letting people build any part of their argument out of something that's not footnotable. That's actually, good and helpful for everybody involved. But I don't know if that's the only story. But and maybe if that's a real difference between him and the smaller publishers, that's a good thing. Except, the better selling authors are the ones who can be the most outrageous. So anyway, he goes on to ask, or she goes on to ask, do you feel that some of the independent conservative presses don't apply the same level of checking? Absolutely. There are many small publishers where, when I see one of their books, you can let your ideology blind you whether or not you're publishing books that are presenting reality to your readers. Sure, fine. An argument, now here we get back to some other So not this question, but the next one. What are your, is this it? Where's the one about, a little bit later on. There is this idea out there that conservative titles are more prone to bulk sales. There's a link here, in fact, to a Washington Post article about the same from when? Earlier this year, April 15th. I'm curious to see, since we have a theme going here. Washington Post's headline in this case, the GOP's big bulk book buying machine is boosting Republicans on the bestseller lists. That was Paul Farhi writing in April of this year about, starting off with Dan Crenshaw's memoir. It's illustrated with a photo of Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, who it's alleged did all the same things. So what is his answer to this? There's this idea out there that they're prone to bulk sales, which means that some organization buys boxes of books to give away as premiums, thereby driving up the number of copies sold in a way that seems deceptive, such as GOP groups buying copies of Donald Trump Jr.'s book to give to donors. How do you respond to that? Although she doesn't really put a very fine point on the question, he takes it to mean that, let's see. In reality, it's not a major issue for conservative titles. I mean, if there were a magical way to just move 10,000 extra units because the Koch brothers or somebody had a fund for making conservative bestsellers, my job would be so much easier. Well, they do have that fund. It's just not for your titles at your imprint. It's for other imprints like Regnery. But anyway, I say this with real affection for all the liberals in my life, but almost all liberals possess a delusion, not shared by conservatives, this part being wrong, of course, that the other side is faking it. Every liberal I know believes that every conservative is just pretending to be a conservative. This is very interesting to me. Tucker Carlson, who is a smart guy who went to school in Connecticut and lives in a city, he's obviously not actually conservative, they think. He's just inventing this to make money. I know no liberals who think this, by the way. And all the people watching Tucker Carlson are also just pretending to be conservative. So then, who would buy Tucker Carlson's book? It's treated as a weird mystery. Well, of course, that's not an accurate description of anybody or anything, and I would imagine probably not even an accurate description of the liberals he claims to know. I think that there are probably a lot of liberals who think that Tucker Carlson is genuinely conservative, but that he's inventing stories from a conservative perspective to sell to conservatives to make money. That's true. And that he might not actually believe that such a thing is happening, but he knows that reporting that such a thing is happening will be a big money maker for him. Sometimes I think he really does believe that certain things are happening. Certainly when it comes to him, every protester who shows up and draws on the sidewalk outside of his house with chalk is equivalent to, the insurrectionists who were bear spraying the cops and threatening the lives of the vice president, etc. But whatever. But no, I don't think I actually know anybody who doesn't think he's conservative. I think it's very easy to believe he's conservative. It's just also very easy to believe that he doesn't necessarily believe all the stories he tells, even though they're helpful for conservatives, some of which he might be happy to believe if necessary, but it isn't necessary. Plus, of course, the idea that that's unique to liberals is just ridiculous. I mean, how often have we been able to point to things that Republicans say being projection? I mean, I think there's good reason to believe that there are a few things that you could possibly accuse both sides of, and that they participate in sometimes from different approaches and different angles or with different ideas or outcomes. But the idea that this is somehow exclusive to liberals is wrong on both counts. Not only is it not exclusive, this doesn't even happen among liberals. I don't think so. I don't think there are any, I guess on both sides, I don't think there's any conservatives who believe that liberals are not really liberal, that they're secretly conservatives at heart either. I mean, I don't know whether he really suffers from this misunderstanding or this is just his way of obfuscating to get out from underneath the question, which still isn't answered here. I mean, the heart of the question is, look, do conservative imprints really actually do this more often than anybody else? Did they really make bulk sales either to try to boost themselves up the bestseller lists or simply to launder money? I mean, do conservatives do that? And his answer is, well, look, let me tell you the problem with liberals. They believe the dumbest things. They think everybody's faking it. I think both sides, to some extent, perhaps believe that the other side is faking it. Oh, no, actually, he says, no. Conservatives don't have that issue. Conservatives, he says, it's not shared by conservatives. They don't believe the other side is faking it. Well, I don't know if that's true. But at any rate, there's this long tail that then gets you involved in disputing the fine points of it. No. Liberals don't believe that. Certainly not all liberals. In fact, no liberals that I know believe that Tucker Carlson isn't conservative. It's just that we believe that he's a conservative and he doesn't care about the truth, and he'll make money with things that are obvious falsehoods, but genuinely conservative in their outlook and in their origin. And then, you argue for a little while about whether or not that's the case, and maybe he concedes to you that some liberals really do believe that rather than the other thing. And then you take your victory and walk away, realizing only later that you never got an answer to, but do conservatives do bulk book sales more often? Is there a follow-up? Let's see. She follows up and says, nevertheless, whatever your stupid theory, Mike Pence got a $4 million 2-book deal. And I just can't even believe that a single book by Mike Pence could make $2 million without some kind of bulk sales scheme. Is that my own delusion? And he answers, it really depends on what the content of the book is. What kind of answer is that? I mean, I guess it does. Like, could Mike Pence really sell $2 million of books? Well, it depends on whether it's actually a good book. Well, no crap. You know where I wanted to go with that one, but okay. It had Sherlock in it. It really depends on what the content of the book is. Again, this is a hard thing for Democrats to wrap their mind around. It really does matter to conservatives what's in the book. I mean, sure, but we already know what's in Mike Pence. So what we're really saying is, what she's saying here is not that no conservatives will buy Mike Pence's book, but rather that Mike Pence isn't interesting enough a thinker to write a book that would sell $2 million worth of copies, let alone 2 of them. And yes, he could surprise us, that's true. But again, it's this diversionary tactic. Oh yeah, well, liberals and Democrats can't wrap their minds around it, designed to make you grind your teeth and say, yes, I can, watch me. But it doesn't answer the question. What would be a scenario where the Pence book would earn out? She then asks. She's really, here actually kind of digging in. What would be a scenario where the Pence book would earn out? And what would be a scenario in which it wouldn't? I suspect that the two scenarios in which it would, would be, okay. I suspect that the two scenarios in which it would earn out would be if he said some really vicious things about Trump and the John Bolton audience came to the book, or if he gets the presidential memoirs audience. If people bought this book to have a day-by-day account of what was, for all intents and purposes, a real presidency, if it could fail, or it could fail if it's a book that is not granular enough and is filled with platitudes and aimed at an uncertain audience. And hello, that's Mike Pence in a nutshell. If it's not quite for Trump fans, but it's not quite for anti-Trump fans, and it's not quite for historians, then it'd be hard to know who it was for, which is the problem. I think what she's saying is I anticipate that it's going to be that. Why would you pay $4 million for 2 of those? Right? And even if it is the vicious tell-all kind of thing, how many of those can you write? 1. Because, you've told all by the time you're finished with the first one. And it may be that the plan is that the first book is the tell-all book that they can sell lots of units. And the second book is the preparing to run for president, so I'm writing a book, all about me and the things I have a vision about or whatever, and what I like to do with mother and whatnot. When we're alone or what, I got no idea what. But anyway, so let's see. He says, so if it was your basic campaign book, for instance, is the follow-up question. Yeah, if it was called something like The Charge I Bore, and it began with his first day in kindergarten, then it would be hard, at least for me. But I'm wrong all the time. Maybe that's the most valuable book, but it's more likely to be one of the other ones that would be valuable. Yeah, but it's almost certain that the second book is supposed to be the Prepping for Running for President book, like she says. And it is garbage, and that's, ripe for the bulk purchase thing to boost his coffers and launder money. He just won't admit it. Broadside publishes Ben Shapiro's book. What's the response to that been? Who cares about that? Plenty of people think Ben Shapiro shouldn't be invited on any kind of show. That's probably true. All right, and I think that's basically the end of it. So I guess we've extracted the value of it, which is that this guy who's responsible for a conservative imprint at a major publishing house thinks he's got a magic touch somewhere, and two, that he's not going to answer the question directly about bulk sales. Instead, he's going to say, that's a delusion that Democrats have that Republicans don't. And here's what I mean. And then he goes on to explain a situation that doesn't exist, but that every liberal he knows 100% believes, which may in fact be true, because maybe he just doesn't really know any liberals, though he keeps saying, with all due respect to my very good liberal friends, of which you have none, something. All right. Well, that was somewhat interesting. Let's keep talking about Republicans and weirdos and grifters here. I saw this article and put it aside. Not surprisingly, it was also spotted by Kate Sherrill, who sent a link along for it. I think it was probably widely shared because Andrew Kaczynski, a part of this piece in the K-Files over at CNN, assisted here or joined in the headline by M. Steck. And this is just a great straight up lying, grifting, stealing by preying on Republicans story. One of those ones I don't know how to feel about. On the one hand, how could this guy get away with it? Why do I get up in the morning? Shouldn't I switch sides and start swindling people from a Republican point of view? It's worth so much more money. But no, I couldn't take it. That was part of the interview here earlier. The useless interview with this other guy from the publishing world. Could you do it just for the money? Well, I'm a libertarian, he says. So I guess yes is the answer. Anyway, here's this bit here. Porsches, Gucci rings, and billions of robocalls inside the PAC operation that raised millions by impersonating Donald Trump. And if there were really millions involved in impersonating Donald Trump, I would have those millions, right? Me and that other comedian who does an even better impression of Donald Trump. We impersonate Donald Trump all the time. It's just not worth much for us. What are they talking about? At first glance, they write Matt, I don't know, M-A-T-T-E, Matt Knox. Looks like your typical 30-something wannabe internet influencer, flaunting a lavish lifestyle on his public Instagram and TikTok accounts. So in that sense, he actually is that. He drives a black Porsche Panamera around Los Angeles at night, often to the soundtrack of club music. He lives in a luxury high-rise apartment downtown and parties with aspiring models at nightclubs. I'm too old and tired for that, but I'd take the car, I guess, and luxury townhouse. I don't know if I'd stay there, but whatever. He posts shirtless selfies. That ain't happening. Displaying a prominent chest tattoo that reads, "God will give me justice." Is that a wise idea, really? I mean, you might not be able to avoid it, but that just seems like a bad tattoo idea. And was that like, I don't even know what. Okay, well, it's a quote from, I guess, the Count of Monte Cristo. But I was just wondering, like, what was the big tattoo that the criminal protagonist had in Cape Fear? Was that it? Was he quoting Count of Monte Cristo, or was it something else? I don't know. Anyway, just it doesn't seem like a really great idea to have a big chest tattoo in any sense. Anyway, he shows off his crystal-encrusted Gucci rings, Yves Saint Laurent sunglasses, and a handmade designer hat with his name engraved. Boy, he's really made it, hasn't he? The engraved hat. How do you engrave a hat? All right. Your life, this is a great quote, by the way. Your life doesn't need a purpose, just money. That's really straightforward. Knox writes in one post, Knox is an, quote, award-winning writer and, quote, executive producer, according to his online bio. In his LinkedIn accounts, he described himself as an investor in women-led ventures. I mean, I guess, giving money to pole dancers is funding a woman-led venture, maybe, on an individual basis. I don't know. Including a modeling agency, so famously women-led, and a beauty company that sells face masks, which, maybe that's women-led. I don't know. And by the way, I mean, what does that mean? How much do you trust a beauty company that sells you something to cover your face up? I mean, that's what makeup is, I guess, in a sense. But I mean, the idea of actually putting cloth over it kind of thing. Like, maybe that's a good alternative to beauty products. But anyway, but like so many things on the internet, Matt Knox is not who he appears to be. Matt Knox is the assumed name and online persona of Matthew Tunstall, Tunstall, a 34-year-old from Texas who over the past 3 years has raised millions of dollars operating 2 political action committees that impersonated the Trump campaign. Now we're really getting somewhere. Founded in 2018 and 2019, Tunstall's 2 PACs, Support American Leaders, 1 PAC, and Campaign to Support the President, have together raised a total of $3.4 million to date, according to federal filings. While much of that money pays for the billions of robocalls the 2 groups make in order to raise the money, plowing it back in, right? Almost all of which feature, this is interesting, recorded sound bites of public statements from Trump. A CNN K-file analysis shows that the PACs paid Tunstall at least $738,000 of that money to date. I mean, this is like the pure grift. The individual grifter who simply says, I will get a hold of a bunch of money, I will use it to buy lists to make robocalls to. But this is the scheme. I mean, this is how easy it is, I guess, to take people in. You go and you take publicly recorded, publicly broadcast speeches from Trump, take a clip, and then build a thing around it. I mean, I haven't heard one of the calls, but basically if you call with a robocall and 20 seconds of it is Trump's voice, and then cut in to say, support President Trump as he fights for American and Christian values, and whatever the hell you would say. Just donate to, campaign to support the president and help him win back the White House, and all that kind of thing. Even though, none of the money goes to Trump, you could very easily build that. But the evil genius idea here is you play a long enough clip of Trump and then say things that sound supportive of Trump and the people who are on your list, who you do robocalls to. And you know what list to buy. Old people, right? They're the ones, A, with landlines, and B, that you can sucker the most often. And here we do have a both sides problem to a certain extent. I didn't read and didn't discuss, but we'll note for the record that there was something the other day about a Democratic organization that likewise was targeting older voters in ways that I didn't read the story, but clearly the story was meant to imply that there was something unethical about the way the money was being raised, and maybe indeed there is. But this even better, all you're doing with it is you raise $3.4 million, you pay $738,000 of that to yourself, that leaves $2 million and something that you plow back into buying more lists and creating more deceptive robocall texts to keep anything. It doesn't matter that you're not helping the president in any way or doing anything with the money except paying yourself. The whole point is to pay yourself. This is pure grift, not even really with the intent of helping Republicans or the president in any way, which maybe I'm supportive of, because that just siphons off $3.4 million that people intended to use to help Republicans, but it's only helping this one guy, and he's not helping any politicians. In the 2020 cycle alone, the article continues, the Support American Leaders PAC paid Tunstall more than 360 separate times, by far the PAC's largest number of expenditures. The majority of their contributions come from retirees, according to their filings. Who would have guessed? None of the money the two groups have raised went directly to Trump or his campaign during the 2020 cycle. Even though Tunstall reports on his federal filings that his PACs have spent approximately $407,000 towards supporting Trump, a close analysis of those independent expenditures showed that approximately $380,000 of that $407,000 went to robocalls and operating expenses, about $27,000 of it spent on advertising. So at least there is that. I mean, only $27,000. But imagine saying that you spent $407,000 supporting Trump. And that's because in the robocalls where you ask people to send you money, you say, support Trump as he campaigns for traditional values. Well, I just said he campaigns for traditional values, and these people love that stuff. So it's really supportive of Trump. You can't accuse me of just grifting. I'm also calling people who are apt to support Trump and telling them good reasons to do so, and then asking them for money. Tunstall, meanwhile, has been paid nearly double what he claims to have spent on supporting Trump. CNN first reported on Tunstall in 2019, noting his robocall practices appeared to run afoul of multiple federal rules. At the time, telemarketers making the calls for Tunstall's Support American Leaders PAC falsely told CNN that the calls were made by the Trump campaign. Following CNN's report, the Trump campaign filed a disavowal notice formally saying that they had nothing to do with the PAC. Tunstall told CNN at the time that the robocalls using Trump's voice were the result of a technical error. I accidentally had 30 seconds of his voice in there. And his PAC had ceased to use calls like it. But did he? Well, it says, but he kept at it and over the next 2 years built the most prolific political robocall campaign in the country, according to data shared with CNN and No Mo Robo, a widely used application that blocks robocalls. Tunstall's two Trump PACs have placed an estimated 3.48 billion robocalls since October of 2019, according to No Mo Robo. That's really difficult to have to say. That averages out to 184 million robocalls every month to Americans' phones across the country, except it's to a select slice of Americans, thank God. Tunstall did not reply to CNN's numerous attempts to contact him for this story. They should be trying to contact him by robocall, quite honestly. Just call his phone over and over with that stuff. PACs have been around, of course, since the 1940s. I didn't know it was that long. And were designed to pool donations in support of a candidate or a cause. But in recent years, so-called scam PACs have become more prevalent. Adav Noti, the senior director of litigation at the Campaign Legal Center, says a scam PAC is typically seen as one that exists primarily to raise money that is then paid to the PAC's own operators, rather than to engage in bona fide political activity. There is no hard and fast rule that limits how much an operator can pay themselves, and that's why they love them, nor is there a legal definition of what exactly constitutes a scam PAC, making the line between what's legitimate and what's not fuzzy and hard to enforce. Self-enrichment is the defining characteristic of a scam PAC, regardless of what they're saying or doing, or in fact, doing with the money, rather, said Paul S. Ryan, the other Paul Ryan, the vice president of policy and litigation at the watchdog group Common Cause. Just saying you spent the money on robocalls doesn't negate allegations of scam PAC-iness. That's a nice new word. The Federal Election Commission, which regulates PACs, lacks criminal enforcement authority, or any authority for anything since they're deadlocked, leaving it up to the Department of Justice to bring prosecutions, and so far the nation's top law enforcement agency has focused on the most extreme violations, according to experts, and that's a good place to start, but I guess this doesn't count as one of them, or at least hasn't so far, but maybe that's about to change. The DOJ didn't federally prosecute its first scam PAC operator until 3 years ago, when an Arizona man pleaded guilty to orchestrating multiple scam PACs that solicited tens of thousands of small-dollar donations purporting to support political causes. In actuality, the groups contributed less than 1% of donations to candidates for office, according to the DOJ, and virtually all of the money raised by the groups was used to pay the operator or perpetuate the fraud. The operator was sentenced to 2 years in prison, gee whiz, for conspiring to defraud tens of thousands of donors. Okay, just wanted to bring this particular one to your attention, and hopefully one day in the near future we'll read about his being prosecuted. You can read a little bit more about the text of the calls and the scripts that he was using, and why and how he used the calls to directly mimic pitches sent by the actual Trump campaign, as he did in a February 2019 call asking for money to send fake bricks to Democratic congressional leaders at the same time that the president's campaign was doing exactly that. They just basically say, what is his campaign doing? We'll say we're doing the same thing and confuse people and steal all their money. Again, I'm not 100% sure I oppose that happening to those people, but in the fairness of the pursuit of justice, well, you know, we should do something about it.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, that seems like a pretty Friday way to wrap things up, and I'm noting and checking in with Justice that apparently we dropped our feed at some point, but came right back. So hopefully that won't happen to him as he brings you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next to take you into Friday. Stay tuned, and we'll see you